So here's a spookfish and some slime mold, which probably sounds like the start of some kind of a horror story. But actually, the story I'm going to describe is a really positive one about a biological future for cities. We're in the early stages of the shift from the industrial age to the ecological age of humankind. And I'm going to talk about how we can take a biological design approach to cities, starting with a high-performing building and then looking at the spaces between buildings. And it's all good news. We can radically reduce our carbon emissions and create a better quality of life. So turning to the building, I think it's fair to say that to move beyond conventional approaches to sustainability, we need to embrace new ways of working and new sources of ideas. And on this project, the main source of ideas was biomimicry. And we included a biologist called Julian Vincent in the design team. And light is pretty much a precondition for all life forms on the planet. So it's not surprising that there are all sorts of organisms that have evolved to harvest light in ingenious ways. So this is the eye of a spookfish, and it has these mirror structures which point downwards and focus very low levels of bioluminescence onto its retina. The next one is a plant that lives in deserts. Now, this is a plant called the stone plant, and for reasons of thermal stabilization, most of the plant is actually below the ground. And then it has what you could call a roof light in the top. And the photosynthetic matter is down in the bottom, and that roof light brings the light down into the basement where the photosynthetic matter is. Another one we looked at is a brittle star, and this is a starfish that lives as much as 500 meters below the ocean surface, where light levels are incredibly low. And to protect itself against predators, it's evolved this covering of near optically perfect lenses over its skin. And those can detect tiny amounts of movement and focus them onto receptors, so it can see predators long before they see it. And I think all of these examples encouraged us to think much more deliberately and creatively about how we would bring light into this building. A fairly common way of designing for daylight in office buildings is to just think about what the distance should be between the window walls. And you can find lots of examples in London of really deep plan office buildings, as much as 25 meters deep, which makes them very energy intensive because it means they're artificially lit and largely air conditioned. And we reckon that the right distance is about 12 meters. So no one is further than 6 meters from the window. What does that suggest in terms of a building form? Well, you could take these narrow floor plates and you could just stack them up into a tower form. And that would make sense if you had a very dense urban location. But we wanted to develop a concept that was a bit more universal than that. So we looked at two other approaches. One was to create a kind of ring of floors with a central atrium that brings light down into the middle of the building. And then a third one was a more linear approach, where we would have two linear blocks of office space, and then we'd have an atrium down the middle. And it was the third one that seemed to work the best when we looked at it. And when we analyzed the light levels in plan, what we found is that we got this kind of curved pattern of shading towards the middle because of the shading effect of the opposite block. So then the next move was to curve those floor plates so that we get a very even quality of light. We're following that pattern and getting an even quality of light all the way along. This produced two further challenges. One was that narrow floor plates aren't that good for creative clusters of people. In modern offices, you need some deeper floor space for creative clusters, and we weren't making very efficient use of a rectangular site, and we were probably going to have to deal with a rectangular site. So then the next move was to elaborate those into undulations in a way that's similar to biological organisms, similar to the way that they optimize their surface area to volume ratio. And what was great about this was that we still had no further than 6 meters from the nearest window. Now we were making much more efficient use of the rectangular site, and we were getting really good facilities for these creative clusters of people. Then looking at the building in sections, still with daylight, we concluded that it would be good if we could shape the building to let light deeper into the atrium. And we even looked at the possibility of gathering light from near the top where there was an excess and putting that into fiber optic tubes. And for this, we looked at a rainforest plant called Anthurium waraquinum, which has lenses all over its leaves, similar to the brittle star, and that's how it can live in very low light conditions at the rainforest floor. So these focus the light. And there are already a number of technologies that focus direct sunlight into fiber optic tubes, but this plant somehow manages to focus diffuse light, which is much more useful. So we concluded that we wanted to shape the building to let light deeper into the middle. And then in the middle of the atrium, we proposed this large-scale mirror, like a spookfish eye, that would bounce light deeper into the floors. And then thinking about what we might do underneath that, biological structures normally serve multiple functions. So here we thought this was a great opportunity to create a really dramatic meeting space which the building owner could rent out for events and so on. One of the secondary benefits of designing for very high levels of daylight is that you can grow a whole range of plants in that office space. And NASA have researched this and found that these plants, these three, in sufficient quantities, can deal with all the contaminants in internal environments. And as Kamal Miatal described in his TED talk, this has been tested in a building in India and has achieved a 20% increase in productivity. So we're planning to do the same in our building, and the aim is that the air coming out will be cleaner than the air going in. So you can see there that it was daylight that really drove the form of the building. And when it came to the structure, the way that we used biomimicry here was to help us reduce the amount of material required to the minimum possible. Now, you could characterize biology by saying that in nature, materials are expensive and shape is cheap. And what that means is that you often get very complex shapes that achieve remarkable efficiency by putting the material exactly where it needs to be. Now, what I'm drawing here is a section through a bird skull. And most bird skulls are made up out of very thin layers of bone, which are then connected together by struts and ties. So it's a bit like a combination of dome technology and space frame technology, all in a humble garden bird. So it's using a minimum of materials to maximum effect. Another one we looked at is the cuttlefish, which has a main bone, a cuttle bone, and that's pretty similar. It has these thin layers of bony material, and then there are these undulating walls that connect it together. So again, a very material-efficient way of creating robust structures. And we wanted to achieve a similar level of resource efficiency in our building. So we analyzed a generic floor construction of a concrete slab and columns, and we analyzed this in terms of which bits were working hard structurally. And it turned out that a lot of that material is really not doing much, and it could be taken away. So all these bits that I'm shading in dark here, these are structurally redundant. They're really not very necessary. And if we made the structure the shape that it wants to be and put the material where it needs to be and not where it doesn't, it would probably look something like this. So we would end up with columns that are hollow, because that's more efficient. The floor plates would probably be deeper in the middle, and then we would take out the mass of the floor with a whole string of bubbles. So this is actually only a small departure from existing technology, and it's starting to get close to the kind of resource efficiency you see in those examples of the bird skull. And I think this captures how useful biomimicry can be as a design approach, because you can allow the design conversation to wander off in pursuit of the most idealized solutions, and then come back to something that is as close to that ideal as possible. Never start with reality. Always start by identifying the ideal and then compromising as little as necessary. I wish I had more time and I could tell you about how we learned from termite mounds to design a passive cooling and heating system for this building, how we learned from mimosa leaves and folding beetle wings to design a shading system for this building that lets in exactly the right amount of light and converts all surplus light to electricity. And how we learned from curved leaf forms and shells to design a new glazing system that achieves a 50% saving in glass. And this is how the scheme looks now. So you can see all the key ideas there. You can see the form driven by daylight, the atrium with the spookfish light reflector, and the facade made from a curved glazing system using incredibly thin curved bits of glass. We've proven the commercial viability of this, and now we're looking for clients to take this forward to the next stage. And this is the next slide. This is how the atrium looks. So we can see that instead of gloomy, gas-guzzling buildings that are soul-sapping for the occupants, we can create light-filled workspaces that promote productivity and interaction, that are uplifting to work in, and use a fraction of the energy of conventional office buildings. So that's an example of how you can use biomimicry to create a really high-performing urban building. Now let's look at how we might use biology to rethink some of the spaces between buildings. John Cage once said that some people are scared of new ideas. I'm scared of old ones. And one of my favorite new ideas is this one. This is called the dog vomit slime mold. And cities need more of this, especially London. But seriously, this could inspire new solutions to urban transport systems. And here's how. Slime molds form minimum distance networks between food sources. And in 2009, scientists at Hokkaido University in Japan experimented with a map of the Tokyo region. And what they did is they put a little source of food on each of the surrounding cities, and then they put a slime mold on Tokyo itself. So the slime mold is spread out, it located all the food sources, and then it optimized the connections to form a minimum distance network between all of those. And it turned out that this exactly matched the layout of the railway network around Tokyo. Now, it had taken the engineers thousands of hours to optimize that layout. The slime mold did it in just 26 hours. And one of the scientists involved repeated the experiment for the UK, which looked like this. And I think increasingly we're going to see biologically based algorithms used to produce optimized solutions to buildings and urban design. Now, biological systems, living systems, generally adapt very quickly to changes, to take advantage of changes. So it's worth asking what changes are currently underway that could benefit cities. And one of the surprising changes which has occurred in one of the surprising changes that has occurred in many developed countries is that we're actually past peak car use. So this graph shows the car travel data for the US, and you can see that it actually peaked in 2005, and then since then it's come down substantially. The same is true for the UK. We passed the peak well before the financial crisis, and now it's on a steady downward trend. One thing is for certain, we do not need to build any more roads. Recently, the UK Chancellor announced a £28 billion road building programme. Now, with that money, we could afford to lift 5 million people out of fuel poverty by insulating their homes and create world-class cycling facilities in all UK cities and meet our targets for aid to developing countries to help them create cities fit for the ecological age. So I'll stop ranting now and talk about the other advantage of this shift, which is that sustainable forms of transport are generally much more space efficient. So as we shift away from cars towards other forms of transport, that will release a lot of urban areas. So what will we do with those released areas? What can we do? Here are some suggestions. We could create urban agriculture schemes like this one, which teach city kids about plants and healthier food. Street markets are a great way of celebrating the whole theatre of food and allowing it to animate public space in the way that it did before the domination of the supermarkets. We could have more public spaces for events like the Sultan's Elephant, which bring people together and show cities at their best as exciting places for the exchange of ideas and shared experiences. One of the most dramatic examples of rethinking urban infrastructure is this one from Korea, South Korea. And it was championed by their visionary mayor, who made the case for tearing down a 6-lane motorway and restoring the river underneath to form a 5-mile-long linear park with cycle routes and walkways. So instead of nose-to-tail cars, your journey to work could be the most enjoyable part of the day. And this brings us on to another biological design approach, which is known as biophilia. And this was popularized by E.O. Wilson and refers to a hypothesis that there is an innate link between human beings and other living organisms. And there's some very persuasive evidence to show that people are actually happier and more relaxed if in regular contact with nature. And there are some cities around the world that have really started to push ambitious targets on this. So Singapore, for instance, it's been creating workspaces with high levels of productivity, hospitals with dramatically improved recovery rates. It's already built 200 kilometers of park connectors, and it's set itself a vision of being a city in a garden. And in spite of being a very dense city, it's increased the amount of green space, so it's nearly 50% of the urban area now. A lot of the work we need to do in rethinking cities will involve rethinking infrastructure networks. And in biology, networks often serve multiple functions. So for instance, as well as transporting liquids, they may provide structure. As well as conducting information, they may form part of a skeleton. So it's worth asking how our existing infrastructure could do more, how it could change from being monofunctional to multifunctional. Old pieces of infrastructure could be given a new lease of life, like the fantastic High Line in New York. Existing pieces of infrastructure could be made to do more. What if we were to take a really bold approach to cycling and propose schemes like this. This is a fan-assisted cycle tube that would run alongside railway lines. Cyclists would be protected from vehicles and the weather, and with a gentle tailwind, they would get an extra 5 miles an hour. The directness of the routes and the additional speed would open up vast areas of London to cycle commuting. And where those tubes ended, you could have high-rise bicycle storage towers like this. Why not give cycling the quality of infrastructure it deserves? Now, London is a relatively green city. There's loads of green spaces, and it'd be fairly straightforward to connect up those to form a continuous network. It would mean that in some places we would turn underutilized streets into linear parks, and in some places we would need more schemes like this, the fantastic Green Bridge in East London, which connects up 2 areas of parkland. One of the most radical approaches to urban design is this one, proposed by Janine Benyus and Dana Baumeister of Biomimicry 3.8. And instead of design approaches like LEED and BREEAM, which all too often are really just about mitigating negatives, what they propose is using ecological performance criteria. So establishing what a pristine ecosystem in your location would have delivered in terms of carbon sequestration, food production, water filtration, moderating microclimate, etc., and then designing the city to match all of those criteria. That is setting the bar much higher than it is at the moment and pointing the way to where we need to get to create cities that function like true biological systems. So we've seen how biology can be used to inspire design innovation, how we can develop new biological algorithms, and how we can use these ideas to reconnect people with nature. All of the ideas and solutions we need to create cities of the ecological age already exist. What we need now is leaders with the courage to put plans into action. I think there's a role for designers to become more proactive as well. Instead of giving the client what they ask for, we should give them what they never dreamed would be possible. That destination of the ecological age is close enough to touch. And I firmly believe that biology will be one of the best sources of ideas for those that want to lead on that journey. And that's a leadership role we can all take if we choose to. As Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. We can all work together to bring about positive change. And I look forward to working with lots of people that share that belief. Thank you.